Today I'm going to show you how I built this 6 slat-out bed for my tiny Ford Transit Connect camper van. It's about the size of a twin-size bed. It can sleep 2 people if you want to get real cozy. It has 3 drawers for storage and a super long slat-out table for doing all the table-y things like, I don't know, cooking outside or something. This thing was crazy for me to build. I haven't really made anything like it before, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It's not perfect, but it definitely gets the job done. I've already slept in this thing on a road trip for like a month, and yeah, I'm loving this thing and I'm super stoked to have it in my van. So let's get to building. First, we gotta make sure we have all the tools and materials we need to make this thing. I'm gonna try and be pretty detailed in this video just to make it easier for anyone who wants to follow this guide and make your own slide-out bed. So we definitely want some of the basic tools like all the different saws, a table saw, miter saw, circular saw, jigsaw, and we're gonna need a drill, pocket hole jig with pocket hole screws, some clamps, wood glue, a sander, and some paint and varnish of your choice. There's a few more specific things we need, but I'll mention those as we go along. I ran to Home Depot to get some plywood. We're gonna need about 3 sheets of 3/4 inch thick, 4 foot by 8 foot cabinet grade plywood, and 1 sheet of 1/2 inch thick, 4 foot by 4 foot cabinet grade plywood. This is the 3/4 inch plywood I used, and this is the 1/2 inch plywood I used, if you just wanna use this as a reference. This 3/4 inch plywood is super heavy and long, so make sure you can actually fit it in your van, otherwise you'll be screwed. These just like barely fit in my van, it's crazy. Like literally have to go on top of the seat. This is the only way they can fit in here. Don't be afraid to ask for help, unlike me who spent an hour in the parking lot trying to get these giant pieces of wood in my van, because I'm too awkward to talk to other humans. Eventually I got it with the help of a kind man. Thanks, man. I'm visualizing where the bed is gonna sit in the van. I made an outline, took some measurements, and I'm gonna start cutting the pieces for our cabinet frame. If you're replicating this design, obviously you wanna make sure you're measuring everything to fit the specific space that you're putting it in, because you might not have the same van as me, you might want it to be longer, taller, or wider, but I'm just gonna give you a sort of standard size that fits in a van like this. Our first cut is gonna be for our back panel, and it's gonna be about 11 1/4 inch by 70 1/2 inches. Then we're gonna cut 2 bottom stretchers, and they're each gonna be about 3 inches by 70 1/2 inches. Next, we'll cut the front stretcher at 1 1/2 inches by 70 1/2 inches. Then we'll cut 2 end panels at about 12 inches by 20 inches. Now that we have all these pieces for our frame, I'm gonna start marking all the spots where I need to drill pocket holes. These holes are looking good. Now we're gonna do a little dry assembly to see how everything fits together. I said I was gonna do a dry assembly, so I don't know why I'm adding glue to this section. Oh my god. I guess I just got excited. And by the way, make sure you're using pocket hole screws to assemble this and not just any regular screws. Just a tip for you. All the pieces are attached now and our cabinet frame is looking pretty good. Now we'll cut the pieces for our 2 drawer dividers at around 8 1/4 inch by 19 1/4 inch and see how those sit in the mix. They fit perfectly underneath the front stretcher, which is exactly what we want. Sweet. Now I'm gonna drill the pocket hole screws for the drawer dividers, but we're gonna assemble those later. For now, let's move on to our slide-out bed frame. First, I measured and cut 1 piece for the riser at about 2 1/4 inch by 67 inches. Then 2 pieces for the front and back of the bed frame at around 2 1/4 inch by 67 1/2 inch each. And then 2 pieces for the sides at around 2 3/4 inches by 18 5/8 inch. Next, I'm gonna cut the fixed bed slats and the sliding bed slats. For the fixed slats, we're gonna cut about 9 pieces at 2 1/2 inches by 19 1/4 inch. For the sliding slats, we're gonna cut around 8 of them at 2 1/2 inches by 18 5/8 inches. This part was actually pretty fun because I just measured them all out and made one long cut with the circular saw. Then I brought them over to the table saw and just ran through them without having to readjust the rip fence each time. Pretty satisfying, actually. I lined up all the slats, and as you can see, this thing is starting to take shape. I drilled pocket holes for the frame and began to dry assemble that as well. This is how it's gonna slide. Now we're gonna work on the drawer boxes. We're making 3 boxes, so we're gonna cut 6 pieces for the front and back of each drawer at around 20 inches by 5 inches, and another 6 pieces for the sides at about 18 inches by 5 inches. Man, I really hate cutting these large pieces like this. It's pretty scary, so I'm probably doing this wrong, so feel free to roast me in the comments and give me tips so I don't cut my fingers off. We're also gonna take our 1/2 inch thick plywood and cut 3 pieces for the bottom of the drawers at around 22 inches by 18 inches each. We're gonna fully assemble the boxes in just a bit after we sand everything, but for now, we're still just basically doing all of our initial cuts and dry assembly, but we are almost done. You guys are gonna laugh at me for this one, but I bought the wrong size drawer slides on accident. Instead of returning them and buying the right size, I decided to just cut holes in the back panel so I could use these slides. Probably because I didn't want to have to wait for new ones to arrive. I mean, it looks funny, but you know, you're not gonna be able to see it in the final product, so it doesn't really matter. It's still gonna work just fine, just make sure you get the right sizes. I first needed to figure out where the drawer slides were gonna sit so I can make sure it doesn't interfere with my slide out table, which we're gonna cut right now. As you can see, I marked the spots where I needed to cut and marked where the drawer slides would go. I cut a hole in my end panel with a hole saw and finished it with a jigsaw. I don't know if there's a better tool for doing this. Maybe a router or something would work better. Then I cut another piece so I can attach these 200-pound 36-inch drawer guides to it, and it's gonna look something like this. Now that we have a better idea of how everything is going to be assembled, let's take everything apart, start sanding, and then wet assemble everything. I don't even know if wet assemble is the actual term, but it's not dry, that's for sure. Sanding is my least favorite part. It probably took me like 3 days to sand everything.
I don't like sand.
There's like 50 pieces of wood here, and I know I don't necessarily have to sand absolutely everything, but it just feels wrong not to. I like having those soft edges on all the wood, like maybe it's like some kind of OCD thing or whatever, but I don't know. A router and a rounder bit probably would have come in handy for this, but we don't have one of those, and I didn't want to go out and buy one, trying to, you know, save money on this project, so yeah. That's where we're at. Once sanding was completed, I started to assemble everything. I used this wood glue and some wood clamps to hold everything in place, starting with the back panel and bottom stretcher. Then I attached the front and back panels, and then the other bottom stretcher. Then I attached the front stretcher. I used clamps to hold it in place and made sure it was about 3 inches from the top. Next, I attached the riser, laying down a long line of wood glue first. It's looking pretty good. Now I'm gonna quickly attach my drawer slides on each end. I just use a couple pieces of scrap wood to hold the slides in place, so the height will be consistent on every drawer slide. I lined up both the drawer dividers and started to attach them. Once the drawer dividers were in, I attached the rest of the drawer slides to the drawer dividers. After that, I'm gonna assemble the drawer boxes. I put them in the cabinet so they would keep their perfect square shape, and I did this with all 3 boxes. Now we're gonna finish assembling the boxes and put the bottoms on. I'm gonna pre-drill some holes using this countersink bit that I bought at Home Depot, add some wood glue, and then attach them from the bottom. I used 1 1/4 inch Torx screws for this. I repeated the same process for each box, and it looks like they're fitting in there pretty good. Now we're gonna shift focus a little bit over to our slide out table. I used the piece I cut from the hole that we made earlier as a little faceplate, but we'll attach that a little later. Let's attach the piece that's gonna hold our 36-inch drawer slides. I drilled some pocket holes in a few spots. I was a little off on my height measurements, so I had to use wood washers, if you want to call them that, to raise up the piece a little bit. I really had to jam this thing in there. I screwed that piece in, and we're ready to screw in the table slides. I held it in place with a couple clamps and screwed it in. I tried to use a binding post here, but I guess it was too big and I couldn't close the drawers. Oops. They both slide in and out with no problems. Now let's go and attach our slide out bed frame. I got a pair of these 18-inch, 500-pound drawer slides. These are kind of the star of the show here and what makes this design super cool. Usually these types of van beds will have wood legs, but these slides turn it into a floating bed frame, which is awesome. Anyway, I attached the slides with screws and a couple of 3/4-inch binding posts, holding them together again with clamps. If you don't know what a binding post is, it's basically just a bolt that's gonna go through and hold everything together a lot better. I put a few on each side. It might be overkill, but when you order things on Amazon, they usually come in bundles of more than you need. So I might as well use them all. Cool, now we have our bed frame in place. Now we're gonna attach all the slats, but we have a bit of a problem. We were a little off on our measurements somewhere along the line, and we have this gap where the slats should be sitting flush. I measured each end and cut a piece of wood that would compensate for that gap. It's a perfect fit, but we're gonna come back to that piece in just a minute. I laid down all my slats and separated them by about 1.5 inches using a piece of scrap wood. I made sure each piece was lined up as close as possible. Then I started with the fixed bed slats and pre-drilled each hole with my countersink bit because we don't want any wood splitting going on. Same thing with drilling the screws in. I also use these number 8 flat washers in every hole to prevent wood on wood contact, which can cause a lot of creaking, which we definitely don't want because that's going to be really annoying. I stacked the washers in some spots to make the bed more level as well. That is so much better. Now coming back to that leveler piece, I threw down a string of wood glue, clamped it in place, and just did the same thing as before, but with the sliding bed slats. I pre-drilled those holes and drilled the screws in. I think I drilled like 68 holes in total, which is crazy. But anywho, all the screws are in, and now we can see this thing starting to function how it should. Now I'm gonna attach the drawers to the slides. I always hate doing this because I can never really get them to be perfectly level. What's the problem now? The wood spacers and the clamps definitely help, but I don't know if it's because I'm not working on a perfectly level surface or my previously attached pieces weren't perfectly level, but I don't know. Leave your tips below if you have any. You see that? That is nice. Oh, and by the way, I measured and cut some drawer fronts too while you weren't looking. I started with the slide out bed front, holding it in with clamps, pre-drilling some holes, and screwing it in. Now we're gonna attach the box drawer fronts. I put some spacers in there so they have some room to open without hitting the floor. I went on the inside of the drawer and screwed them in. Kind of an awkward angle. And this definitely took several tries before I got them somewhat level, but eventually I got it. I mean, look at this. I'm so close to being done. All I gotta do is add a table for this section right here, and then paint it and add drawer slides, and that's pretty much it. So, whew, what a project this has been. I measured and cut a long piece for my slide out table. I checked to see if it's the perfect fit, and looks like it is, so I sanded it and began to attach it. To attach the table front that I mentioned earlier, I drilled a few pocket holes at the bottom of the table. And now it closes very nicely. The next part is probably my favorite part of any of these projects, and that is painting. I went to Home Depot and got some supplies, some primer, pure white paint, and varnish. This is the holy trinity that I've been using for painting everything, and it's working out great for me. First, I hit everything with the primer, then the ultra pure white paint, then the varnish. You don't really have to wait too long in between coats, which is awesome. It's pretty dry in less than an hour. After the varnish is dried, I always like to hit it with some fine sandpaper. It makes the surface really nice and smooth. Even if it's just one pass with a 320 or 400 grit, this should do the trick. We're at the final step of this project. We're gonna add some drawer handles. I got these cork drawer handles from Etsy, and these things are freaking awesome. I'll make sure to link all the products I use in the description. A lot of people like to use leather drawer pulls, but we're vegan up in here, so we don't wanna be using anyone's skin and supporting a cruel and violent industry if we don't have to. These cork handles are plenty strong, and they look sick too. All right, looks like we're finished with this thing, and it looks incredible. It's got 3 soft close drawers for storage, a slide out table for cooking and other outside activities, and a spacious twin size bed. It looks good, it feels good, we're all about it. It's definitely not perfect, but neither am I. So what's next in the van build, you ask? I guess I'll show you how I insulated my van. And let me tell you, this was a disaster.
Oh no!
So make sure to subscribe if you want to see it, but in the meantime, if you want to watch how I mounted my solar panels, watch this video. Thanks for watching, bye.